Well, here I am making another of these short videos, and it's a while since I've done this, so I hope I can remember how to do it without making a terrible mess of it all. I was going to begin by saying what extraordinary times they are that we're living in, but of course I think I've begun every one of these videos by saying that, and they seem to become even more extraordinary with every passing week. I wanted just to mention a couple of things about the way in which the celebration of the liturgy will change this weekend. As I'm sure you're aware, the government has said that from this weekend onwards, it's necessary for people, obligatory for people attending places of worship to wear face coverings unless they have a valid exemption, which I know some of you do. One or two people have asked how this works in practice, with a couple of things in particular. First of all, for the readers, and the answer is that readers come to the lectern, they stand in front of the lectern, then they remove their face covering so that they can read and they can be seen and heard, and then at the end of the reading they replace the face covering and then leave the lectern and go back to their places. What about Holy Communion? This is a little bit complicated. It's not very easy to do this, but this seems to be the best way. You come up for Holy Communion with your face covering still in place. You receive Holy Communion and you have the sacred host in your hand. You then step to one side, keeping the sacred host secure while you do so. You then remove your face covering so that you have access to put the sacred host in your mouth, but you shouldn't touch the part of the covering which is over your nose and mouth, because that would contaminate both the covering and your hand. Once the covering is removed, you place the sacred host in your mouth and consume it, then return the covering to place, and then you go back to your seat. So the only time that the covering is removed is when you have already taken the sacred host into your hand and you are standing to one side. That seems the best way to do it. Let's see how it goes. And if for any reason it doesn't work well, we'll think of something else. But let's try it for now. It's not how I would want to celebrate Mass. I don't suppose it's how any of us would want to celebrate Mass. But that's what we have to do. That's where we're at. And the great joy is we can have Mass. We can receive the Blessed Sacrament. We can be part of the sacrifice of Christ on Calvary. That's the thing that matters most. So today I wanted just to briefly talk about someone who many of you, perhaps older people, will have come across in the past. And it was Kathy really that gave me the idea, because she gave me a copy of a reading from Magnificat from a few days ago. So that reminded me of the existence of Caryll Houselander. Caryll Houselander was born in 1901 and died in 1954. She's not terribly well known at the moment, but in her time she was very well regarded. She was a very popular Catholic spiritual writer. And she wasn't a Catholic at birth, but she became a Catholic as a young child, and she left the church and came back to it. And she experienced a number of mystical visions. And one of the great themes to her life was the sense of the presence of Christ in everybody else. That's the theme of her visions, and then that's the theme of much of her writing. One of her visions was so intense that she just basically saw the presence of Christ in all the people around her, and that lasted for several days until it gradually faded. But for some time she had this extraordinary gift of being able to see the presence of Christ in everyone around her, everyone she met. What a great gift that is. So the incarnation was very real to her. And I think that visual sense, that spiritual visual sense, is something that comes through powerfully in the things she writes, and you'll see that's true of the short passage I'll be reading to you in a moment or two. She was an artist. She was trained as a woodcarver. Later on she became an illustrator, and she drew pictures. I can even show you one here. There's a book of hers which I'll show you in a moment, and that is an illustration of hers of St. Ignatius. So that's the style of the writing, the drawing that she did, and she illustrated many of her own articles and writings. She had this saying that she said, all work should be an act of creative love. That would be a great theme for us, actually, wouldn't it, as we go back to something more like normal life, people going back to work in their normal places of work. All work should be an act of creative love. She has a little kind of walk-on part, really, in a great biography of the 20th century. She was romantically involved for a short time with Sidney Riley. Sidney Riley was a British spy, and he was one of the people who is sometimes referred to as the model for James Bond. So, like lots of people in the middle of the 20th century, she has this rather extraordinary mixture of romantic danger and ordinary, mundane, everyday life. Ronald Knox was a great fan of hers, and he had a lovely little saying about her. He said, "She seemed to see everything for the first time." I suppose that's a great spiritual gift, isn't it? That's one of the things we love about children. The first time a child sees the sea, the first time a child sees the snow, the first time the child sees, I don't know, a lion or a tiger, when you show them to them on the television or whatever, they're full of, wow, this is amazing. The first time I've ever seen anything like this. And so what Ronald Knox is saying is that for Caryll Houselander, because of her the intensity of her mystical experience, of her closeness to Christ, she seemed to see everything as if for the first time, with that great sense of depth and perception. What a wonderful thing. Can you imagine if people were to say that about us? He or she seemed to see everything as if for the first time. During the war, Caryll Houselander was much sought after by people who were troubled, people who needed some kind of spiritual healing, some kind of psychological healing. And she was able to cast almost a blanket of peace over these people. And that was a really important thing. And various people who used to refer people to her, asking for her help, would say that she was able to love them into wholeness, to love them into health. And once again, in our busy lives, and there's so many demands on us, so many things that we're being asked to do, the idea that we might be asked to love one another into wholeness, to love one another into health, well, that seems just a great thing to me, a great aspiration to have. It would be a good thing for us to spend the week mulling over, how can I love the people around me into wholeness? I suppose lots of us, that's all we want, really, all that we need to bring us back to health, back to wholeness. So many people's lives are unloved, are empty of love, are cold, and all they need is someone to love them, for them to burst forth into flower and burst into life, so we can love one another into wholeness and health. She spent much of the last part of her life as a spiritual advisor, and there are various letters written. There's a book here which it's a series of books, Caryll Houselander. This is called Essential Writings. There's a series called the Modern Spiritual Masters series. So that book, it's worth reading. It's very interesting. It intersperses her biography with some of her writings. But she died quite young, at the age of, I can't remember now, in her early 50s anyway. But the particular piece that Kathy found that I think is lovely, I'll read it to you, just make a brief comment on it at the end. It is estimated that in every second of the day and night, 4 elevations of the host take place. I never cease to wonder at this, or to rejoice in the knowledge that there is never a second of one's life in which one cannot lift up one's heart to God in the heart of Christ lifted up in the host. I think too of all the places in the world where the Mass is being celebrated, of how Christ, who began his earthly life in a stable and ended it on a scaffold, has penetrated into every place and circumstance of human life, and has gathered every fragment of man's love to be offered in sacrifice. Think of all the places where Mass is being celebrated at this present moment, the very moment in which you are reading this page. All the cathedrals and all the churches of the world, all the tin huts and mud huts and makeshifts that are the best man can do in many mission fields, in ships out on the deep seas, on battlefields and camps, in prisons and hospital wards, in the desert and in the jungle, in the great cities of the world, in the cottages of faithful peasants in persecuted countries, and under the tall trees of lonely forests of exile. Think too how everywhere where Christ is lifted up, men are bowed down in adoration. Soldiers, sailors, airmen, fishermen, men of every country, of every colour, rich men and poor men, free men and prisoners, old men and young men, men of every craft and trade and profession, all adoring God, all in communion with one another, all in communion with the Holy Father, all in communion with you and with me. And I, if I be lifted up, will draw all people to myself. What a great thing that is. So 4 times a second elevation, so that's 240 times a minute. I've been talking for nearly 10 minutes, so that's 2,500 masses have been going on in the course of this short video. That's an amazing thought. I'm so sorry I'm not with you. I'm in the church in Petworth, I hope, if all's going according to plan, baptising a young lad called Ottokar. So pray for him and for his family, and I'll be producing another message for you next week. I'll have another baptism next Saturday, and I'm really looking forward actually to having been back to a normal Saturday morning and to seeing you once again. If there's anything I can do, you know that you only have to ask. If there are any questions you have, then by all means ask me. And I try to make myself as available as I can. I know those of you that aren't able to come out still or don't feel safe to come out, we don't get to meet up. But if you need me to come and see you, if you want me to stand in the garden and talk to you or shout across a hedge, if you've got questions or anything like that, all you need to do is ask, and I will do the very best I can. Have a wonderful time together on this Zoom meeting and a wonderful day. And I hope I'll see you all again soon. Have a great weekend. God bless you all.